So you're doing business in Thailand. You're focused on the big picture, right? Growth, strategy, clients, the whole shebang. But what if I told you two tiny, often missed details could actually make or break your transactions? Today, we're tackling withholding tax and stamp duty. These are the small steps that, trust me, make a huge difference. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's make this real. Picture this. You just paid a freelancer 10,000 baht for a job well done. You've sent the money, the invoice is marked paid. So that's it, right? Job done? On to the next thing on your list?
Well, not so fast. In Thailand, that payment is just step one. There's a second mandatory step that so many people miss. This is kind of the hidden layer of compliance that actually protects your business. And believe me, getting it right is absolutely crucial.
All right, first up is a term you're going to hear all the time: withholding tax. Let's think of this as the very first tool in your everyday tax toolkit. It's a fundamental part of making payments here. Here's the number one thing everyone gets wrong. Withholding tax is not an extra tax. Let me say that again. It is not an additional tax you have to pay. It's simply a way of collecting tax that's already owed. You're basically acting as a helper for the tax department, prepaying a little piece of the recipient's annual income tax for them. So how does it actually work in practice? Well, it's a pretty simple four-step process. First, as the payer, you deduct the correct tax percentage from the payment. Second, you send that amount you just deducted straight to the revenue department. Third, you give the person you paid a tax certificate as proof. And finally, they take that certificate and use it to get a credit on their own annual taxes. It's a clean, circular system, you see.
Okay, so that's the theory, but how does this all work in the real world? It really all comes down to a few key numbers.
So when do you even need to think about this? The magic number is 1,000 baht. If you're paying an invoice for that amount or more, that is your cue, ding, 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 time to withhold tax. So how much do you withhold? Well, it's not one size fits all. The rate actually changes depending on what kind of service you've paid for. Things like transportation, advertising, professional services, and rent, they all have their own specific rate. But to make it even simpler, these are the four rates you'll probably use 99% of the time in your B2B transactions. Just remember, 1% for transportation, 2 for ads, 3 for most services, and 5 for rent. Commit these four to memory. Okay, let's go back to our freelancer example. You owe them 10,000 baht for a service. And we now know that Paula has a 3% rate. The math couldn't be easier. 10,000 baht times 3% is 300 baht. That's your withholding amount. Simple. And here's how the cash actually moves once you factor in standard VAT. The invoice is for 10,000 baht plus 700 baht in VAT, so the total is 10,700. But you withhold that 300 baht. So you actually pay the freelancer 10,400 baht. The other 300, you send that over to the revenue department. The freelancer gets the cash plus a tax certificate for 300 baht to use later. See? It all balances out perfectly.
Finally, you've got to file it. There are two main forms you need to know: PND3 for individuals, like our freelancer, and PND 53 for companies. Now remember, the deadline is the 7th of the following month. But here's a fantastic little tip. If you file online, the government actually gives you an extension until the 15th. It's a total no-brainer.
All right, that's withholding tax. Now let's move on to our second tool. It's something that looks so small but has surprising power. We're talking about stamp duty. So unlike withholding tax, which is about income, stamp duty is a tax on specific legal documents, or what they call instruments. Think contracts. But its real purpose isn't just to collect a few baht. It's to make your contracts legally valid and enforceable if you ever end up in court. Seriously, you might look at a stamp that costs just a few baht and think, can this really be that important? And the answer is a huge, emphatic yes. Because here is the bottom line. If you end up in a dispute and have to go to court, a judge can simply throw your contract out as evidence if it's not stamped. That tiny little piece of paper could be the only thing that's protecting your entire agreement. So what are the actual rules and what are the risks if you get it wrong? Let's take a closer look. A whole range of business documents need to be stamped. The most common ones you'll probably run into are things like rental agreements, service contracts, loan agreements, and even giving someone power of attorney. Each one has its own small rate, often just a tiny fraction of a percent. But this is where it gets really serious. The cost of the stamp itself is tiny, but the penalty for forgetting to apply it on time, well, that is not tiny at all.
If you're late by less than 90 days, the penalty is a 200% surcharge. That's twice the original duty that you owed in the first place.
And if you delay for more than 90 days, the penalty just skyrockets to 500%. A five-fold penalty. This is exactly why you cannot afford to ignore that little stamp.
Okay, I know we've covered a lot of ground, so let's bring it all together into a simple, actionable checklist you can use in your business every single day.
All right, let's boil it all down. 1. Is the payment over 1,000 baht? Then you need to think about withholding tax. 2. Remember the key rates, 1, 2, 3, and 5%. 3. File your WHT by the 7th of the next month, or better yet, file online and get until the 15th. 4. Signing a contract. Always ask if it needs stamp duty. And 5. Whatever you do, don't be late. Stamp it on time to avoid those absolutely massive penalties.
And that brings us to our final thought. Withholding tax and stamp duty might seem like such minor details, but really, they're about diligence, about risk management, and about building a solid foundation for your business. Which kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the true secret to building a great business found not just in the big ideas, but in mastering all the small rules along the way?